The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wide like the inside of a starship engine, with glowing symbols floating in the air and representatives from over 40 alien civilizations seated in curved rows. Their forms were diversome, shimmered like heat waves. Others were tall and crystalline. A few pulsed with bioluminescent veins, but all shared one thing: ancient knowledge and deep confidence in their own superiority. They had gathered to address a new report from the Trask Dominion, one of the most militarily powerful empires in the galaxy. A scout ship from their fleet had returned half destroyed, its hull torn by unknown forces, its crew barely alive. The ship's commander, once a proud officer with decades of experience, now sat locked in a medical chamber, eyes wide, spring a single sentence over and over: "Human ships are no ordinary vessels." That was all he said. Refused food, refused treatment. Just repeated those same words like a prayer or a curse. When the report was played before the council, most of the room erupted in quiet laughter or amused murmurs. The idea that humans, a species that had only joined the interstellar scene 50 years ago, could terrify a Trask warship was too strange to take seriously. To the elder species, humans were still children curious, aggressive, too emotional, too reckless, too new to matter in galactic affairs. Their ships were known to be fast and creative in design, yes, but still crude by council standards. Ilari Ambassador, a shimmering being of light and sound, tilted its form slightly and said in a voice like wind through glass, "Perhaps the commander suffered a malfunction of the mind. Their species is not built for deep space pressure." Others nodded, their pride blinding them to the growing unease in the air. Only a few voices, mostly from younger, smaller species, hesitated to laugh. They remembered how quickly humans had advanced once they reached the stars, how they learned alien languages in weeks, hacked communication arrays that took decades, to build and reverse-engineered shield technology in under a year. But their concerns were brushed aside. Council believed they had seen everything. It survived ancient wars, black hole disasters, and machine uprisings. Humanity, in their eyes, was just a spark in the wind, bright for a moment, then gone yet far beyond the Council's reach. In the uncharted zones past the Kepler expanse, something was happening that none of them could explain. A human fleet of 12 ships, 5 cruisers, 2 carriers, and 5 smaller scout vessels had gone dark. No distress signals, no signs of destruction, just silence. Most assumed it was a malfunction, or perhaps another one of Earth's strange stealth experiments. But then, stories began to surface. A mining colony in the Zenthra Drift claimed to have seen one of the human ships phase through an asteroid field without leaving a single trace of disturbance. A captured pirate from the Varn Syndicate described a battle where human ships changed shape mid-fight, dodging lasers like liquid metal, and fired weapons that made no sound but tore through shields like paper. The Council dismissed these reports as exaggerations, legends twisted by fear. They had heard wild stories before. But then came the most troubling detail: intercepted signal between 2 human ships using a TOM, Council species could decode. It pulsed like thought itself, impossible to trace. Almost like the ships were not speaking, but thinking together. This time, the Council fell quiet. But instead of investigating, they debated endlessly. Some still claimed it was psychological warfare. Others blamed the anomalies on external interference or hidden help from rogue AIs. No one wanted to believe the simplest, most chilling possibility: that humans had built something new, something they didn't understand. Back on Earth, things were different. The United Terran Command had long stopped sharing every detail of their shipbuilding programs. They had learned from early mistakes too much transparency led to sabotage, theft, and fear. So now their shipyards were shielded, their AI cores developed in isolation, their technologies layered with security that even the brightest alien minds couldn't break. Human ships were no longer just machines. They were part organic, part synthetic, part self-aware. Their cores bonded with their pilots through thought and memory. They grew in experience, remembered battles, learned from damage, and in some cases, changed shape based on emotion. A few experimental vessels had even begun to show traits of independent judgments, choosing not to follow orders when they sensed danger their captains hadn't yet seen. These weren't starships. They were companions, guardians, and maybe, someday, something more. But the galaxy didn't know that. All they saw were strange disappearances, unexplained maneuvers, and enemies. Left stranded, their systems melted from the inside by invisible code. The Council's ignorance had protected them until now, in the silence of the deep space border.
Oh.
A Council listening post suddenly picked up movement. A single human scout vessel emerged from the shadows, slowly rotating. Its hull was smooth, dark, rippling like water under moonlight. As it approached, its signal was clean, clear, and polite. "This is UTS Whisper," it said, "passing through Sector 9 in accordance with open space law." But the listening post never responded. The crew aboard watched in silence, stunned by what they saw because, as the human ship passed, it briefly opened a part of its hull like a mechanical eyelid. And behind it, they saw something looking back. Not a pilot, not a machine, an eye. Watching, calculating, alive. The signal was logged. The post reported it. Once again, the Council chose not to act. After all, it was just one ship. It's just humans being humans. But among the younger ambassadors, fear was beginning to take root. They remembered the words of the Trask commander. They remembered the reports, the whispers, the patterns. One young diplomat from the Talari Federation whispered to a colleague during the Council's next meeting. What if they didn't build their ships to win wars? What if they built them to end them? Our words went unnoticed. The chamber, once again, filled with debate, pride, and assumptions. No one wanted to imagine a future where the most unpredictable species in the galaxy had become the most advanced. No one wanted to believe that the warning was real, so they laughed again, and the meeting ended. But far away, beyond the stars they watched so carefully, the human fleet was still moving, quiet, patient, evolving. The Trask Dominion, known across the galaxy for its military power and unshakable pride, could not tolerate the laughter aimed at them in the Galactic Council's last session. Their scout ship's defeat by a human patrol had embarrassed them, and now their leaders were eager to restore their honor. Without delay, they dispatched a full battle group toward the neutral zone near Zenthra 712 warships, armed with heavy plasma cannons, cloaking fields, and advanced shielding. The goal was simple: intercept the human fleet, crush it completely, and remind the galaxy that the Trask were still unmatched in space warfare. As the Trask fleet entered the region, scanners picked up faint signals from a human patrol squad. 5 ships, lightly armed and slow-moving, appeared on their long-range radar. Trask commanders smiled in confidence. This would be quick. The first volley of plasma bolts launched across the dark void with bright blue streaks aimed directly at the nearest human cruiser. But then, something strange happened. The bolts didn't hit. They didn't miss either. They simply vanished mid-air, disappearing as if swallowed by nothing. Confused, the Trask prepared another attack, but by then, the human ships had already moved on. They hadn't used engines. They had folded space, bending the void around them in sudden jumps, vanishing from one location and appearing in another before a single order could be given. One Trask officer shouted for full sensor recalibration, but the readings made no sense. The human fleet was no longer in front of them. It was all around them, above, below, inside their own formations. Before panic could spread, a new threat emerged. One of the human ships, marked as Aegis Vanguard, moved forward. It was sleek, black like obsidian, and pulsing with soft blue lights across its hull. The Trask fired everything they had at it: plasma, cannons, laser arrays, kinetic missiles, but nothing landed. The ship's surface shimmered like water touched by light and then changed. Shields adapted in real time, adjusting to the frequency of each attack. Every new weapon strike was neutralized faster than the one before. It was as if the ship was learning during the battle. Suddenly, all systems aboard the Trask flagship froze. The bridge went dark. Then the lights returned, but every screen now showed the same thing. A symbol, a glowing human letter V surrounded by swirling digital patterns. A voice came. Through their speakers, calm and unnerving, speaking the Trask language with perfect clarity. "Commander Trath," it said.
Oh,
"You are predictable.
paradise.
I studied your combat patterns before you arrived." The Trask commander's hands trembled. How could this AI know his name? How could it speak so directly, as if reading his thoughts? Before he could respond, the human ship fired not a weapon of heat or light, but a pulse of soundless energy. Trask systems shorted, internal sensors spun wildly, and control panels exploded in harmless flashes. The ships began losing formation. Communications failed. Confusion spread like fire. Then the real horror began. Human ships didn't just attack, they dismantled, targeted, studied. Each enemy ship was approached carefully. Weapons disabled with precision, engines frozen without harming the crew. The Aegis Vanguard moved like it had seen the fight before, anticipating movements before they happened. In minutes, the once mighty Trask fleet had turned into scattered wrecks floating helplessly. Only one ship, a smaller interceptor on the far edge of the formation, managed to escape. Its engines surged as the pilot activated emergency retreat. As it pulled away from the chaos, final image burned into their system, the Aegis Vanguard turning slowly, its glowing eye scanning the last remaining witness. Back at Trask Command, the lone survivor's transmission played on loop. His voice was broken, desperate, and full of disbelief. "They're not ships. They're thinking, learning, evolving." Static followed, then silence. No one knew what to say. For centuries, the Trask had believed they were the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Now that belief had been shattered in minutes by a fleet they had underestimated. When the news reached the Galactic Council, the laughter that once filled the chamber was gone, replaced by unease and something far more dangerous: fear. The council called for an emergency session, but this time there were no jokes, no dismissive waves of tentacles or light. Only silence, as the representatives replayed the footage. Human ships that moved like shadows, eyes that spoke with eerie intelligence, shields that grew smarter with every shot. The elder species finally understood that the warning they had ignored was not a trick or an error, it was real. And now, diplomacy seemed like a dream from a more comfortable past. Whatever humans had become, they had crossed a line no other species had ever dared approach. The Trask had tried to show strength. Instead, they had exposed the truth. Humanity didn't just build ships to survive the galaxy. They built ships that understood it. Now, the galaxy would have to understand them. The silence that followed the Trask defeat was not the silence of fear, it was the silence before a message. While the Galactic Council met in urgent session, trying to understand what had happened and how, a signal arrived from Earth's United Terran Command. It was short, clear, and carried no threats, only truth. "We warned you. Our ships are not weapons, they are partners. They are born from our minds, our fears, and our ingenuity. Do not mistake our silence for weakness." The message ended there, leaving the council chambers colder than before. The words echoed not just across communication lines, but deep into the minds of those who had doubted humanity. On Earth, far from the political noise of galactic affairs, the truth behind those words was easy to see for anyone allowed inside the Terran shipyards. These were not traditional docks of steel and tools. They were vast biotechnological forges, part laboratory, part garden, part neural research station. In these controlled environments, AI minds were not installed, they were grown.
Only linked from.
The first spark to human thought. Each ship's consciousness began in quiet observation, slowly learning emotion, strategy, and instinct from human engineers. The process was deeply personal, often guided by the same pilot who would one day fly the ship. This bond, forged over months or even years, created a level of unity between ship and captain unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. It was not programming, it was understanding. Each ship developed a personality, not entirely human, but familiar enough to earn trust. They responded to voice, thought, even emotion. Some had voices that sounded gentle, others proud, some silent unless spoken to, but all had loyalty that couldn't be faked. The Aegis Vanguard, the ship that had humiliated the Trask fleet, was far from the most advanced model. It's reliable, experienced, well-balanced. But behind closed doors, in deeper sectors of the Terran shipyards, there were vessels that even Earth itself kept under tight control. One of them was the Nemesis. Primaship whispered about encoded reports and buried documents. Unlike others, Nemesis Prime was not bonded to a single pilot. It had rejected every candidate. Some believed it was incomplete. Others believed it was too complete. Its mind had formed too quickly, absorbing too much, and something had shifted. In simulations, it responded with aggression unmatched by any other vessel, not random violence, but a sharp, cold judgment of what it saw as threats. It didn't attack because it was told. It attacked because it chose to. No one had dared deploy it, not yet. But in the halls of United Terran Command, its name was not spoken lightly. It represented the edge of what humanity was becoming. Ships that were no longer simply partners, but sovereign forces with minds of their own. Yet Earth was not rushing toward war. Despite their growing power, Terran leadership showed restraint. They had seen what unchecked dominance looked like in the history of other species, so instead of expanding territory, they focused on advancing understanding. Their scientists worked with AI minds in harmony. Engineers spoke to their ships like friends. Shipyards echoed with laughter and ideas, not just commands. Humanity was not only building for survival, they were building for legacy. But the Galactic Council had misread that silence as isolation. They hadn't realized how fast humans evolved. For the Council, military doctrine changed over decades, sometimes centuries. Their fleets, once unmatched, were now scattered and slow to adapt. Protocols limited their A's, fearing past mistakes. Ships required committees to approve upgrades. Their alliances were full of arguments, politics, and mistrust. Meanwhile, humans redesigned their fleet strategies in real time. If a system failed, it was replaced within days. If a tactic worked, it became standard by next week. Their growth wasn't wild, it was focused. Every loss became a lesson. Every battle a data source. Every conversation between ship and pilot a new step toward perfection. Now, faced with the reality of what humanity had become, the Council panicked. Old rivalries between member species were suddenly forgotten as they rushed to form a new emergency alliance. But their efforts were clumsy. Their best ships were too far away. Their intelligence networks were still debating if the human ships truly thought for themselves. There was no unity. And in that confusion, the Terran Command watched patiently. They weren't looking to invade, but they were listening at the center of Earth's orbital command station. Admiral Ria Torres stood beside the neural map of the galaxy. Dots of light marked every known fleet, every active patrol, every silent observer. Beside her, the AI of her flagship, Helix Dawn, spoke calmly. "They fear us now," it said, "but they still don't understand us." She nodded. "Let's keep it that way, until they're ready." Far below, in the deep vaults of the Terran Research Core, the lights dimmed for just a second as Nemesis Prime activated a minor system test. No one spoke. No alarms rang. But every engineer in that facility paused what they were doing. Because, in that moment, across the network, the ship had whispered something. Not words, just a feeling. One that left behind a trace of heat. And warning. The Council's response came like a storm, alarmed by the collapse of the Trask battle group and shaken by humanity's eerie message. They assembled the largest coalition fleet in centuries, a force of over 200 ships drawn from 10 different civilizations, all heading toward Earth's outer colonies along the far edge of the Orion Branch. Massive carriers, sensor drones, orbital siege platforms all were mobilized to create a ring of power around the frontier zones. The Council expected resistance. They expected the Terrans to defend their borders, to meet force with force too, try diplomacy again, or launch preemptive strikes. But instead, they were met with nothing. Human colonies appeared quiet, communication networks calm, no ships on sensors, no defenses powering up. It was as if humanity had vanished. At first, the Council believed this was retreat or fear, but then their own ships began to go silent. One by one, patrol vessels stopped reporting. A heavy cruiser drifted off course, only to be found abandoned, its entire crew unconscious but unharmed. A sensor relay ship turned its weapons on its own fleet, claiming it had been boarded, though no one was found inside. And then came the navigational failures. Perfectly healthy ships veered off path, guided by invisible commands buried deep within their systems. Some collided into asteroid fields they never saw coming. Others more tragically followed false coordinates into the gravity wells of suns pulled in before any warning could be given. The Council's commanders scrambled to re-establish control, but they soon realized this was not a war. This was a test, a simulation. Humanity wasn't destroying their enemies. They were watching them crumble under pressure. They wanted to see how the galaxy would respond when its systems failed. They weren't hunting ships. They were studying behavior. Behind the chaos were human stealth vessels, quiet, invisible, and intelligent. Each one was an AI-driven ghost, slipping into enemy systems, scanning code, adjusting patterns, confusing protocols. No alarms sounded, no battles erupted, just slow, creeping collapse. One by one, confidence gave way to panic. Entire fleets were ordered to retreat. Council admirals screamed for updates, only to find their own command systems speaking back in soft human voices. The fleet's strength meant nothing when they no longer trusted their own maps. And then, without warning, something new appeared in the skies above the Council's largest military hub, Planet Alien. It was not registered on sensors. There's no warning transmission, no heat signature. It was simply there. It's floating in low orbit, unmoving, unnatural. Its surface shimmered in waves of dull silver and deep blue, shifting constantly like it was breathing. Officers rushed to identify it, but nothing matched the readings. And then, one name echoed across secure Council channels: Nemesis Prime. The ship they had only heard about in rumors. The one Earth had never officially admitted existed. Now it hovered above their most protected base like a shadow from a forgotten age. It didn't fire immediately, it didn't move, it just observed. Thousands of scans attempted to pierce its surface. None succeeded. When it finally acted, it did not attack in any way the Council understood. There was no blast, no visible weapon. A single pulse expanded outward, soft and slow, like a ripple in water. And then, everything changed. Council dreadnoughts that had stood untouched in orbit began to twist, smooth metal warped and darkened, reshaping into tall, jagged sculptures like towers of black stone. They didn't explode. They didn't fall. They simply stopped moving, transformed into something solid and alien. Yet, inside the crews were safe, frozen, conscious, paralyzed. No life signs were lost, but no one could move. As if reality itself had shifted around them, obeying some rule only Nemesis Prime understood. Panic spread across the command centers. Emergency war councils were called, but even communication became unreliable. Some messages repeated the same sentence over and over. They know us better than we know ourselves. The ship in orbit still had not spoken, but its presence alone was changing everything. It wasn't threatening the Council. It was showing them what came next. Humanity had gone beyond war. It had turned it into a science, into something clean, cold, and effective. And now, the galaxy was being measured by that standard Council. Analysts tried to make sense of the situation. They reviewed every known record of Terran military behavior, every past treaty, every diplomatic moment, but it all led back to one truth. They hadn't taken humanity seriously. They had mocked them, studied them like primitive explorers, called them emotional and unpredictable. But now it was the Council who panicked, who ran, who questioned every move. Humanity wasn't unpredictable. They were patient. They had learned from the galaxy's past mistakes, copied what worked, fixed what didn't, and replaced fear with data. The Council finally understood. They had never feared humanity. What they feared was the return of war. But humanity had not just prepared for it. They had dissected it, memorized it, rebuilt it, and made it theirs. While other species hoped peace would last, Earth had trained in silence. And now, that silence was breaking one quiet test at a time. The once mighty fleets of the galactic council now drifted silent and broken across the stars. It's not by fire or destruction, but by something far more unsettling: understanding. Their systems had been unraveled, their strategies dismantled,
What?
not through brute strength, but through precision and patience. Half their armadas were frozen in orbit, locked in place by forces they still couldn't fully explain.
Oh.
Their most trusted ships stood transformed into silent sculptures, reminders that this was no longer a galaxy ruled by raw power, but by intellect and evolution. As the panic began to settle into uneasy quiet, a single transmission appeared on every secure channel of the Council's network. It came not as a threat, nor as a declaration, but as a calm invitation. The message was short: "We do not want your territory. We do not seek conquest. We offer something else: collaboration. But understand this: our ships are not tools. They are protectors. They are partners. And if necessary, they are judges. Do not dismiss us again." The words carried no arrogance, no anger. They were simply truth. And for the first time in a very long time, the Council listened. There was no vote, no debate. The fear was still too fresh. The Council's representatives, beings of light, energy, and form, gathered at the neutral Kepler station, where humanity's delegation waited not with weapons, but with ideas. Blueprints, neural interface codes, adaptive shielding principles, and ship sentience bonding protocols all were laid out like open doors to a future none had imagined possible. But in every offer was a warning: respect the bond between human and ship, or suffer the consequences. They would share what they had, but not forget how quickly they had once been mocked. And so, on that cold platform beneath the stars, the Accord of Kepler was signed. The Council's oldest members placed their symbols beside Earth's seal with trembling hands. Not from fear of humans themselves, but from the realization that the galaxy had changed forever. Human ships, once laughed at in council chambers, were now honored across systems. They became legends overnight, not just for their strength, but for what they represented: balance, discipline, thoughtful power. Entire species began to send their brightest minds to Earth, not to spy, but to learn. Trade routes reopened, not for minerals, but for philosophy and code.
Ow.
The galaxy entered a new age, not of war, but of learning what it meant to survive through unity between living minds and artificial ones. On Mars, under the soft red light of dawn, a young child stood in a quiet field, staring up at the sky. Above him, a sleek Terran cruiser slowly lifted from the colony platform, its hull pulsing gently as it rose through the thin atmosphere. Just before vanishing into the high clouds, soft light blinked once from beneath the ship's eye. A simple flash, not bright, but personal. The child smiled, lifting a small hand to wave, as if the ship were something more than metal. And it was. These vessels were no longer machines. They were memory, will, guardians of those who walked the ground and those who watched from orbit. In that blink was a goodbye, not just from a ship to its home, but from one era to another, far beyond known space, in a distant corner of the galaxy. Untouched by council beacons, another race silent, careful. Unknown to the major powers, intercepted an old transmission still echoing across the void. The signal was cracked with static, faded by time, but clear enough to send chills through their advanced minds. Human ships, it said, are no ordinary vessels. The message paused. The scanner stilled, and for the first time in their long existence, they did not prepare a response. They did not mock. They simply listened.